season?
Yeah, so I mean, we're coming into kapha season. We were just in Vata season, so there's like early winter, then late winter. So we're kind of like in the late winter period, but also it's like a Ritu Sandhi, which is like a seasonal transition. So this is the time of year, as I've mentioned in other podcasts, that it's during seasonal transitions that people tend to get sick more.
Yes.
And this happens to overlap with how the holiday is just left and everyone goes to this sort of apex of like celebrations and indulging and staying up late and going to this event and that event and eating this and eating that and eating out of their normal regimen and then like holidays end and then we kind of like plummet and people are like left with whatever's left over from what they did from overdoing it during the holidays. And so repeatedly sort of like a reminder that if you want to prevent getting sick during the holidays or after the holidays, then you have to sort of sort of find that balance enough to keep you anchored on the side of health by doing all the things you're supposed to do, your regimen, your sleeping practices, your dietary consumption and portions and timing and as much as possible, because that's the thing that's going to be the anchor that prevents people getting sick. But then you have the extreme temperatures and we're going like from cold to colder and
Yes.
um
Yes.
it's knowing like you know kapha season per se, as far as the doshas are concerned throughout the year, has its own sort of like um micro levels. And so we were saying we're going into kapha season, it goes further into thinking like, well, we're in the transition of vata into kapha. We're not necessarily in spring, though, in Ayurveda we call it Vasanta Ritu, which means like spring, but spring to a Westerner typically implies when um things start to sprout and the birds start to come out and blueberries start to forming, and it's not just yet. It's like, what stage of spring are we in? Because
Yeah.
in Ritu, or spring season, as we transition to spring, which is governed by Kapha, it's the increase of the sunlight that happens after the solstice that, it's like if there is snow or when there is snow, that accumulation of snow gets affected by the heat of the sun. So as we're increasing with time, snow starts to liquefy, and it's that liquefaction which disturbs or decreases the digestive strength, um, and also causes like more upper respiratory accumulations or reactions or symptoms, because it's that liquefaction. So in Ayurveda, in Sanskrit especially, like everything can be described. There's like a descriptor for everything to describe that thing that happens. And so that thing that happens when like the sun is increasing in the atmosphere and the liquefaction occurs from the cold, wet, damp qualities in the atmosphere from like a dense snow to like a rainy kind of season, which happens when we get more into spring. We usually go from snow to like rain more consistently as spring progresses. That liquefaction is also called skanatva, and it's that liquefaction that people that tend towards respiratory issues or have kapha predominant issues or have digestive um, compromise or decrease or degeneration or lack of strength will be in that place of like upper respiratory, because usually what doesn't go down goes up in Ayurveda, and that goes up into the lungs, into the esophagus, into the bronchioles, into the respiratory tract, into the sinus cavities, into all these things. And so, understanding there's a word for that that describes that, but also what's the phenomena that's happening. And again, as we're transitioning into the season, so we're entering into Vasanta Ritu, coming from, like Himanta and things like that, which is like the winter. Um, that's where people, Shishira, it's like Hemanta, Shishira is like the winter going to deeper winter, coming into the spring, like that transition. We need to be mindful of the food, and so foods and drinks that are predominant and like pungent and bitter and astringent help to sort of support Agni, digestive fire, but also to help reduce the liquefaction process so it doesn't get as sticky or as stuck. Um,
Mm.
so we're watching all that. And, when we go from Himanta to Shishira, it's like you want to also still avoid the wind because it's still a Vata aggravating thing. and the cold aggravates vata and kapha, and stay warm and dress warm and eat warm. So this is not the time of year for like raw foods and salads and smoothies and all these kind of crazy things. It's very crazy to think about. If it is cold outside, why would I, in my logic, assume that I want to bring cold into my system? If you're the
Yes.
predominant person that runs very hot all the time, which is a sort of like a deviation from health in and of itself, if you're running that hot all the time, then that's an implication of something else. But if you're an average person that has more pitta predominant, you tend to run hot, then you can get a little bit more towards the cooler side within a range of balance, because again, any extreme during an extreme temperature change is not ideal, because it's that contraindication of extremes in Ayurveda, these opposing forces of hot to cold and wet to dry and things like that, that cause cellular compromise and digestive compromise, and digestive system gets compromised and the rest of the health will follow that, because all the different systems, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, the hemopoietic system, the immune system, the nervous system, like all the lymphatic system, you know all these systems will depend on what the quality of digestive system consist of. And if it's a better health, then the other tissues will have proper nutrients. If it's not the better health, then those systems will have deficits, because it's sort of like a chain of events that all the tissues that we have, the organs, the cells, from the nails to the hair to the, skin to like different organs, everything depends on like what is metabolized and are you getting the full nutrients. So sometimes what goes in doesn't come out, which means like sometimes what you're thinking is eating good food. If your digestive system is compromised, then you're not getting the nutrients from that thing that you're eating. Like, it doesn't matter. Just because you're putting it into the system, the input doesn't guarantee the output of like sustained health and well-being and things like that. Because if it's not being metabolized on this sort of like chain of events or this sort of like domino effect, then you cannot expect you know not to get sick or not to have respiratory issues or not to have insomnia or not to have anxiety or not to have constipation or not to have diverticulitis. Like, you can't. That's just,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like Ayurveda forces you to sort of reflect and sort of reframe how you're doing life, because one, Ayurveda supports longevity, health, and well-being so that you can support the goals of what your purpose are with more ease. That's one of the purposes of Ayurveda. But it's also knowing like you are human, you are going to get sick if you're subject to certain things. You're not immortal. Ayurveda can make you feel more immortal, that you won't get sick as often. And if you do, the frequency, the duration is definitely significantly reduced when you're living within the consciousness of Ayurvedic diet, lifestyle practices, and all these things, and treatments and seasonal transitionary kind of like remediation from like the purging or the cleansing or, all those things. And so it's like you might not get sick. You might get sick once a year. And if you if you do, it won't last as long. The impact won't be as intense or won't linger as much.
Well, let's pause for a second, because I think this is a great place for us to jump in. And we were both sick last week, and so I want to welcome us back.
Yeah.
And for our viewers and for our listeners, I want to welcome you back to Trust Your Gut. And this is a conversation today with Antonio Aragona, Ayurvedic doctor, or doctor of Ayurveda. And we are here today. We're talking about seasonal change. We're talking about, as we always do, but something that's really coming up for me and us both being sick last week is also, what time is it? I listened to Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a pleasure activist and an author, and has written books like Emergent Strategy, and has, I think, been brilliant in this time of like revolutionary change over the last several years for a lot of um, social justice movement organizers and leaders in the globally. And she would sit with her mentor, who was also a very powerful organizer for justice, Grace Lee Boggs. And she would ask the question, what time is it on the clock of the world? And I'm really sitting with what time is it? And I think this is also the conversation that we have every month. What is the global time? What is the seasonal time? What is happening spiritually? What is happening celestially? What is happening with the celestial bodies? What is happening with our bodies? What time is it for our bodies? And I think when we talk about wellness and sickness, we are talking about cycles of time. And I think you've done a really incredible job of helping me understand my body as it relates to cycles of time. And right now, we're in an astrological transit. If you pay attention to tropical astrology, any kind of astrology, um, Mars, the planet of conflict and sometimes the planet of war, the planet of masculine energy, not gendered, the planet that governs our impulse. And I think it's really important to name that Mars also guides Aries, and I think you're an Aries, my friend.
In Western, yes.
In Western astrology, we're going to clarify. So I just want to say in Western tropical astrology. And so Mars is in Cancer right now, and I'm a Cancer rising in Western astrology. And as you were describing, the seasonal time of right now, um, I was thinking about Mars and Cancer. And as I entered this season, so Mars retrograded into Cancer on January 6th. And then the next day, we saw fire, right? Mars governing fire. And we saw the fires in LA, the horrible, horrible fires that we know very much originated as a product of climate change and climate crisis. And um, as those fires were moving, I couldn't help but think about the transit of Mars and Cancer, because Cancer is not happy in Mars. Cancer is what I call moon water, the big mother, and Cancer is coming together with Mars. And I think those qualities, those energies are creating steam, right? And I felt like, okay, there's a lot of guidance for me to pay attention to the steam or the fire in my body because I'm a Cancer rising. So I'm paying attention to where Cancer is in my chart. In Western astrology, it's in my first house. It's in my body. I immediately thought of you. I then saw you that Friday and I was bloated and uncomfortable. Um, and I had gained weight and I was feeling um, proud of myself because when I got a cold over the holidays, it did not last as long. So I'm not invincible, as Ayurveda would say, but I knew how to, I was prepared because of how we have been preparing my body and working with my digestion and with my respiratory system and the intersections between. And so when I started feeling aches in my joints and fatigue and this overall sense of fire in my body, this inflammation in my body, I was so upset with myself. I had like this deep feeling of shame and frustration because of, I think in many ways how we internalize ableism and how we internalize this idea that like we should not get sick, which I think is very different than how Ayurveda thinks about how we don't get sick, right? I was beginning to internalize this. this conflict, right? I was internalizing this inner battle that I have within my body when I get sick, being both feeling bad and then feeling bad about feeling bad. And so I wanted to bring that into our conversation, that this the context of this time right now, um, and what we are seeing from a seasonal perspective, how Ayurveda provides guidance for us in this time, and how we look at what's happening um, in the ways in which what happens here on earth, as above, so below, what's happening here in our bodies on the earth is reflecting what we are experiencing with these celestial bodies, with the current cycles of time. So I just wanted to bring that right in here and see what are you thinking?
Well, as I mentioned in other podcasts, that Ayurveda always has, you know, categories on top of categories and subgroups upon subgroups. So it might say like three main causes of disease, six main causes of disease, 10 main causes of disease. And it's like, oh, this is very interesting that they're very elaborate that way. So it's not just only these three, it's these three, but there's other categories based on other angles of Ayurvedic perspective that determine. And so when I say like three main causes of disease are Pranyapharada, Satmendriyartha Samyoga, and Parinam. And so um, when we look at the first one and we say, Pranyapharada, it's translated as, misuse of intelligence. My first teacher had said sort of like um, knowing what's right, but choosing to ignore it. So it's a level of ignorance. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I have a cold, but I want to eat pizza. And the misuse of intelligence, improper intelligence, would suggest the person should eat pizza because they feel like eating pizza, even though they have a cold, and it's going to perpetuate the symptoms of a cold and then push the cold symptoms deeper and create this other paradigm of disease pathology or prolong the healing process. But it's like the unruly mind that doesn't see clarity will choose the pizza versus the soup or the fasting or things like that. Um, so Pranya Parada is like misuse of intelligence or crimes against wisdom, sometimes it gets translated to. Then, Satmendriyartha Samyoga, it's the misuse of the senses. You're either overusing the senses, underusing the senses, misusing the senses, that's like looking at too much, you know, unfavorable stimuli, smelling on inappropriate things, or working in a chemical factory, like any of the things that are going to tax the senses that are used in the world by manas or mind to sort of gather information, then come to decisions. So it's the misuse of the senses. And then parinam, which is time, which is the linear aspect of time from the moment we're given breath to the last breath that we have, everything that's in that paradigm, everything that's in that sort of continuity of like the seasons, the time of life, the time where we are at in this current state of life. Then, in the context of time, we include the astrology because it's sort of fixating on certain points in time and space. So when we think of time or kala, kala is, time. And, kala is governed by Kali. Kali is the goddess of, fierceness, and she governs time. And so she takes what's not serving. And, Kali works with Kala, and Kali also works with Shani, which is Saturn, which is the most powerful planet of all the planets. Um, and understanding that Shani also takes what doesn't serve a person's highest goal. So any specific attachments during certain junctions like Sadasati or periods of Saturn or Saturn returns, like any of those two periods when they're going through a person's chart, Saturn will come in and rip away the things that are unserving for the bigger picture. And so as a person is undergoing their human experience day to day, trying to like stay ahead of health and well-being, and usually health and well-being depend on the proper choices that are made day to day to day that create a sense of contentment. That aspect of time is going to influence as well, because that aspect of time is also rooted in karmic attributes, and that karmic attributes are what are implanted as sort of like the subtle blueprint that comes in with and behind the formation of the body as it's forming as a fetus and then develops into, the baby that's released. That imprint is something that carries through, that there is this sort of underlying cellular intelligence of time wrapped up in a box that unravels over time in its own way, like the gears of a clock that turn. And so in Ayurveda, we have this understanding because Ayurveda is, it's understood in Ayurveda that Ayurveda can stand alone, independent of all the other Vedic sciences, because it also includes all the other Vedic sciences in its compendium of information. So when you're seeing an Ayurvedic physician, you're seeing a person that has some knowledge of the astrology, has knowledge of time and space, has knowledge of like placement of like, vastu, or what Chinese medicine would call like feng shui. Like the Ayurvedic doctor has this very well-rounded sense of connectedness to the world because it's physics, it's astrophysics, it's basic physics, it's environmentalism, it's geology, geography, like all the things have to be factored in. And because we're playing within this realm of time. And so when a person's getting sick, the time is now. When there's sickness, is no better way to be present than with illness. And when we're not present enough, then certain circumstances will create factors that will be the seeds that give birth to a person being ill at any point in time. We hope that when it's a short-term illness, it's a sort of wake-up call. But often than not, people will just push past it, or they don't have a choice because they have to work or their responsibilities, and instead of like resting and withdrawing and building and strengthening and all these things, like the current lifestyle per Ayurveda is not sustainable anymore. The momentum of the current lifestyle is not sustainable. So to the degree that astrology can explain that, that's all fine and dandy, but it doesn't really give a rootedness in the presence of like, what do I need to do? It's almost another way
Yes.
to escape from the present moment because everyone's looking for a story to blame something on something, that Mars did this and Saturn did this and it was conjunct with this. That's all fine and dandy. I read as like, don't get too caught up in the story, because for proper moksha or liberation, we're past the story. There are aspects of us that are not bound to this kind of story.
Okay, pause, because that was a word. you know, that was a word right there. And so I just want to slow that down.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to pull the threads. I'm over here drawing all of the threads of the wisdom that you just dropped. And I think, you know, I I'll come back to the crimes against wisdom.
Okay.
But what you just said about proper moksha, right? The path to liberation um, can be derailed when we get caught up in story. That's what I heard. When we get caught up in the story. And what I also heard that landed in my body clearly landed in my gut, where there was deep resonance and a knowing. I know this. Um, and because I know this with a great deal of experience, there's wisdom here. So getting caught up in the story, I think is so important, especially at this time, because the stories that we are attaching ourselves to, um, they plant seeds and they grow, and I think that's something that we are experiencing right now um, in the world where there are so many narratives and messages about what is health, what is wellness. There's a lot of pop psychology, pop astrology, pop, you name it, pop science, because of the speed of information that we receive via the internet. And so there's a lot of stories that you could be attached to that would cause you to leave your body. Like for me, I agree with very much, I am very grateful that I study astrology with an embodiment practitioner who is so connected to the material reality of our bodies being in this earth, and who divines and connects with the information of Ayurveda as well, that is guiding how they they connect to the wisdom of astrology. And so I think that this is deeply important for me, as I know that there are a lot of stories that could take me away from the reality of my body and allow me to escape. I have a Pisces moon, so we could talk about that. That right, that's a pattern, escapism, and my Neptune placement in Western astrology is in my sixth house of health, routine. Like I feel like this is my Ayurveda house. Ayurveda get your life house. That is like if you do not understand these basic principles and decide to escape, right? Decide that the practice is not what is important, but the ideas are important, then um, I could get caught up in the story, right, that I was telling earlier about the shame that I had for not being well, rather than being with the practices that allow me to get back into my routine of health. So I needed to break that down because as you, it felt like there was so much resonance in my own experience. And I believe that that is a challenge for so many people in maintaining their routines and their practices, and what allows us to um, commit crimes against wisdom. The perpetuation of shame and the shame spiral of, well, I didn't get it right. I didn't meditate this morning. I didn't stretch. I didn't walk. I didn't drink my hot water when I first woke up. I decided, I had this snack and I wasn't paying attention to what I was feeding. I didn't pay attention to what was underneath the craving. Why do I keep getting it wrong? That shame spiral follows the story, and the story follows the state, right, of our nervous system. We know this. And so that creates this perpetual cycle in the body. And I've heard you name, like, this is derailing us from our path to liberation, from moksha. So I needed to come back and slow that down, because that for me has been um a cycle on repeat that I would like to shift. And I think that's the case for many people. And so, yeah, what to do?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, it's like it's sort of like the practices that have to be put in place to help with increasing consciousness, right? So one of the resources we use in Ayurveda are like the primary texts that have an understanding and a knowledge that these are the texts that have that wisdom that we strive for, that when we align with it, it makes sense at that level. When we're discordant with it, you can always have, it's through questioning, a lot of the samhitas or collections of materia medica of Ayurveda and this Vedic sciences in general are always going to have this sort of like layout from teacher to student, whether it's Krishna to Arjuna or it's Atreya to, Agnivesha, like, um, it's like that teacher that's being invoked in those particular texts are the teachers that know the fullest extent. They're called Aptapadeshas. And, as my mentor reminded me, there are very few Aptas in this world that have this complete wisdom connected to that universal pure consciousness that is indisputable. Very few, he says, exist. He's like, we think we call things Aptabadesh, like the five, the gold standard approach to science is considered Apta. It's not considered Apta. Like, to really be considered Apta, you have to have this pure consciousness where like the founders of Ayurveda, the founders of Jyotish, the founders of Vastu, the rishis, like they were the Aptas. They were the ones that have that point of clarity and had no confusion and can tell you from 7,000 years ago that 7,000 years later is exactly what is happening as it was understood to happen, because they had that capacity of clarity connected to that universal wisdom. And so the rest of us that are not at that place, we should be humbled and find access to these particular texts, because those are the things that will help us to get the questions going and exploring and worthy of unraveling to create increased level of clarity, so that when you are more connected to that, then you can see the garbage for what it is. You can see the crap for what it is. You can see the noise, pierce through with that wisdom. You pierce through with a steady, pure ray of light that no darkness can touch it, because you're that confident in that component of consciousness that there is no confusion. And this is where like sattva comes in. Rajas and tamas are the confusing aspects from different angles of like fragmentation to dullness of senses and not sure and confusion. And there's so much out there that creates this perpetuation of confusion. There's so much information. This is why when I tell a patient, come in, whatever you were listening or learning about Dr. Google, it is not the doctor. I am the doctor. I have the training to see things that Google cannot understand. Otherwise, everyone's diagnosing themselves with cancer and dying tomorrow, and it's not, this is not. And then you're confused by like all the conflicting information that fats are okay, fats are not okay. And then, this is okay today, and then tomorrow this is not okay. And eggs are okay today, but then tomorrow it's not okay. Like, no, everybody already has that. We're so past that already. Like, we're so already like, you just have to extract it and understand it, but it's already there. It's already laid out, right? And so if we're able to pierce through by accessing these things like these texts that have this wisdom, the wisdom will not create, the confusion will come up because then you're like sometimes discordant with the things that are in your life that you've created as choices that you have to undo. Of course, there's going to be confusion, right? But the question is that confusion going to bring you to a point of clarity where you feel a little more ease and peace and well-being in your being, or is it going to perpetuate the cycle of suffering? That's how you know what's true versus untrue, right? And so looking at these things like Bhagavad Gita or Mahabharata or the Rig Veda, or reading like the original text of Ayurveda, you know, um, and this goes for like any major tradition that has its rootedness in consciousness that doesn't create divisiveness, right? So we're stepping outside of the paradigm of any kind of religious conformity. This is not about religion. This is about pure consciousness, and like any of the antiquitous traditions in the world, from shamanism to Native American medicine to African tribal medicine to like those pieces that were maintained through millennia that have this understanding of the world, the changing of the winds, the different directions, the astrological points, the references of the stars. That is the thing that is missing a lot today. When we have access to that, that's the gem. There is less confusion when we can follow these things, because these things are timeless. Anadi,
Yes.
Nadi is like timelessness, and understanding that when you're confused, it's because the mind is going through its own thing, because each person has their own karma to unravel with, and their mind's going to be seen in the astrological blueprints. But it doesn't mean you don't have access to the information. It might just make it harder, and you have to be more diligent. Some people's charts more than others. Some things come with great grace and ease more than others. Some people have to make it a really constant, consistent daily practice, because this is the life. This is the karma. Each person has their own individual story to unfold into. But it doesn't mean, just like that Kshatriya, caste to the Brahman caste. The Brahman caste was the highest elite status of status quo, and the lower status quos, to the untouchables. Doesn't mean that you don't have access to consciousness. Consciousness is always there behind the door. Everyone has it, because we're from all that. It doesn't matter who we are, what color we are, what gender we are, what non-gender we are. Like, it doesn't matter. Consciousness is non-binary, it's non-divisive, it's
Mhm.
non-separational, and it's understanding that everyone has access to it. But because of karma, we'll say, each person has a certain sort of pool of karma that they carry around with based on previous life stuff and this life stuff. That's the stuff you have to sort through to get more clarity of clarity. And it doesn't mean you don't have access to it. Everyone has access to it. It's just, do you do the things you're needing to do to get you much closer to that? And that's part of the journey, that each person has the story, that's the story that has to unfold, you know. And in the astrology, which is what I love about Vedic astrology, of all the astrology, because it is the one astrology piece, Jyotish, that the other astrologies don't even come close to, and giving you understanding of what can you do to alter the terrain of this blueprint of karma that you possess and created in this life, that you can manipulate the planets in such a way profoundly. There is no other system in the world that does this. Vedic
Mhm.
astrology gives you mantras, it gives you colors, it gives you gems, it gives you, what day of the week to fast, what time of life to fast. It gives you all these tools. And it also says, and through Ayurveda, you do this, and this to help sort of shift that wheel of karma. It can be done. It gets done. That's why like this Vedantic science comes from this profound place of apta, from these rishis that have this wisdom that said, yeah, these people are going to need tools. And as millennia passes, complexity is going to increase. And so where just the power of a mantra was the power that heal everything is not enough today. Mantras are not enough to heal. 10,000 years ago, that's all you needed. It was a mantra to deal with any kind of disease. And it was a mental affliction most times than a physical affliction. There were certain afflictions that were still common back then, like obesity and fever paradigms and apasmaro, just like insanity or confusion, delirium. Like there are certain conditions that were sort of like meant for humans to experience. But complexity of life has progressed to such a place of confusion today. Of course, people don't know where they're going, what's happening, what's okay, what's not okay. I read this science and this said this and this science says this. And 10 years from now, it undoes this science. Ayurveda doesn't undo itself. Ayurveda builds on itself. It always builds. It
So
doesn't
I have
undo.
to, that's right. It doesn't undo. And I want to come back to this because, I deeply appreciate um, the idea that, we are in a time right now where we receive all kinds of misinformation and disinformation, right? Like strategically planned false information. And we are bombarded with information, and people cannot trust, many people do not trust the institutions that have been normalized as the ones to provide the information that we all believe in. And this includes religious institutions. So I deeply appreciate your naming um, the difference between the spiritual wisdom, the wisdom that originates from ancient indigenous wisdom traditions that predated um, colonial religious capture and control.
Mhm.
And right now, that's where we need to get the information that we can trust, right? We're going to ancient texts. We are going to the teachers who have received the knowledge systems that come from ancient texts that are passed down and shared in community. This is the wisdom and the medicine for this time right now. And I will bring in fascism just for a little bit for the second to say,
Mhm.
right, that it is important as I've been studying fascism and fascist regimes more closely um, to be prepared for the time of now. I have been aware of the mistrust that exists to create um, right, the container that allows fascism to grow and to thrive is the mistrust in institutions as well.
Mhm.
And so for our conversation, as we're talking about wellness and health, and we are talking about systemic health, which is, I think, so incredibly important, and what called me to want to learn and to study Ayurveda and to engage in practice with you and many of the wisdom traditions that govern my life. Um, right, the stuff that governs my life uh, often does not come from a blog post. I get excited about those, but it's probably coming from an ancient text.
Mhm.
And I may be challenging the language in the text, right? If I open the Bible, I'm going to know somebody got to that Bible, some man got to that Bible and told a story that they wanted to tell, but underneath it, there's a message that resonates with ancient wisdom traditions. And so I'm coming back to this point about um yeah, our consciousness right now as it relates to our health.
Mhm.
We are being called, I believe, we are being called to source our information from trusted sources, and they are not your papers of record, and they are not the leaders that you may have been looking for, and they may not even be. I'm not telling you to not go to your doctor, not talk to your doctor, Western doctor, whatever, but to
Mhm.
to be critical in your thinking and your analysis about the information you receive for your health and wellness. And so when you say consciousness is non-binary, consciousness has always been non-binary. Um, so essential for right now for us to know that the binary ideas that we believe in were constructed by humans calling themselves men. And so that brings me back to Mars.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an interesting shloka I want to read from the Charaka Samhita Sutrastan 30. Um, I'll read it in the Devanagari as best as I can as a novice, and then I'll just kind of
That's
just
what we do here.
translate it. Yadhi tat sparsha vinyanam dhari tatara samshritam tat parasyajasaha sthanam tatra chaitanyashan graha hridayam mahadartascha tasma duktam chikitsa chikitsakahi. So the heart sustains tactile perception, life, and the body. That the heart is the supreme location of ojas or immunity or strength or subtle essence, and the locus of consciousness is the reason why physicians call it hridaya or mahat or artha in Ayurveda. So in this chapter, it talks about like the 10 great vessels of the heart, and talks about the importance of the heart, not just as an organ, but as a geographical point of reference, as that it houses a lot of things. It houses like prana vahashotas, so the channel of prana and chi. It houses rasa vahashotas, which is like the circulation of plasma and the underlying first pre-tissue that supports strengthening all the other tissues. It is also the heart region where the heart is, where the heart beats. It's also Chetana, the house of Chetana, which is like consciousness. So consciousness is not in mind where we think it's like in this upper hemisphere of the cerebral cortex. Consciousness is throughout the entire body from head to toe and then some. But the seat of Chetana or consciousness is in the heart. And so it gives a lot of importance to knowing like ojas. Ojas is that place of immunity. It's understood that when a mother is giving birth to a child, that even in embryology and sort of postnatal care, when the mother gives birth in Ayurveda, we wait, I think it's like 80 seconds or something before we cut the umbilical cord, because the final last 8 drops of ojas goes from the mother's heart to the baby's heart as a vital essence that sustains their health, as sort of like a reservoir in the background or a reserve that will help the person's life be longer than the average person if these drops of ojas, which is actually a tissue, um, manifest in the umbilical cord. It gets pumped into the heart of the baby from the mother right before the umbilical cord is cut in that window of time. And so ojas is also seated in the heart. And so when the heart experiences certain traumas and stress, internal, external, then these are the things that will expedite the depletion of ojas and affect immunity, affect the mind. Because if Chaitanya is in the heart area and it's affected, then mind, of course, all throughout the whole existence and a person's being is going to be affected, and there will be mental suffering, and in Ayurveda, you know, it'll say the next shloka would be Tan Mahat Ta Mahamula Stat Chotjaha Parirakshata Pariharaya Vishena Visheshana Manaso Dukkha hetavaha Hridayam yat svadhyaya dashayam shrotasam yat prasadanam tatat sevyam prayatena prashamo jnanama veva cha. So the heart, the great vessels, the ojas need to be protected and preserved. To achieve this, one has to avoid causes of mental suffering, especially diet, drugs, and behavior that are beneficial for the heart, for the formation of ojas, and for keeping the vessels clear should be adopted, along with the pursuit of mental peace and wisdom, right? So this is saying very specifically, like if you're supporting your body with the proper diet, with the drugs being like Ayurvedic medicines or medicines that are, proper behavior. So that would be like lifestyle practices. These are the things that help to sustain health and wealth and well-being. A patient of mine recently asked me, um, because she has some really pertinent health issues right now. And she's like, what are the two basic things if I was going to really adapt and really see if I can support sustaining health? What would you say those two things are? And I'm like, yeah, here's that thing. It's like there are three causes of disease already, but there's also 10 causes of disease. But you're asking for two causes of like what would be the two quickest things that I would say that would be important. I'd said to her, proper sleep, which means you're asleep by 10 and up by 6. There's no discussion about being nocturnal, all this inappropriate wisdom. It's not appropriate. You're not
Inappropriate
nocturnal.
wisdom.
This is
That's my
inappropriate.
thing.
And it's misapplied. And, I understand the science of people trying to justify their bad habits. I mean, people try to justify alcoholism until they're an alcoholic and then they die, right? So it's like, this is the crime against wisdom. That's an example of pranya parada, right? So I said to her, I said, sleep and be less busy, because she's a mother of 3 and she's managing the whole house and husband's handling the financial aspects of things. And that's the balance. And, but she has had a lot of wear and tear and compromise over the years. And with having children, it is considered a trauma. Like it's a beautiful thing in Ayurveda to have children, of course. This is undoubted. And so if it's your karma to have children, of course. The more children you have, the more damage because it's considered a trauma to the body. Like maybe it's pleasant because some parents love being parents. It's great. It's a physical trauma. You're ripping, tearing, opening, infusing, the body is sustaining the baby by pulling all the nutrients from anywhere else it needs to for its self-preservation, because that's by human genetics and evolutionary design. The baby's meant to be kept first. So if the mother is not eating properly, the baby's going to eat what the mother is not eating, and it's going to eat the mother's tissue. Of course, this is trauma for the body. This is just, it's a trauma. It's a, you have something growing inside of you like a tumor, like it's considered like to that
Yes,
degree.
I was thinking a parasite, but a tumor. Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
and but there's a pleasantry to it, but it's nonetheless on a physiological
I
level.
love my child, but yes, that was it. I'll throw that in there.
So it's just understanding like a lot of wear and tear and depletion. And the later you have a child, the more depletion it is, and the less likely you'll bounce back. This is why Ayurveda says there's certain windows of pregnancies that they should happen. If they don't happen, you trust the karma, because if you push past karma, karma gets created more by
Mm,
inappropriate choices, right? We have
mm,
Daiva karma, which is like past life karma that we're born with that we have to unfold in this lifetime, and Purusha karma, which is like the things that we make as choices today will affect us today and tomorrow. So and then whatever we don't resolve before we die, we add to the pool of Daiva karma, and then the next life we have to address it then, And so this is a physics, this is an energetics, this is a whole subtle level of existence that Western science doesn't know how to capture yet, besides like electrons, protons, neutrons, atoms. Like capturing consciousness and replicating it is not easy, but to some it's understood as being there. It's like saying, can we like break down the chemical configuration of what love is versus hate? They're very similar pathways in the
mm.
physiology, how they manifest themselves under like MRI examinations and things like that. It's very curious to see these things, right? So it's more like be curious, be open, look at the texts that have this particular wisdom. If you're not liking certain things, then use proper buddhi or yukti, or which is like logic, to like discern, right? We have to sharpen the mind. The mind should always be sharp until we die, more often than not, because people are like watching TV all the time and eating junk food through stimuli through the 5 senses, that there is this inundation and confusion that creates this lack of clarity, and the mind loses its sharpness. but it should be always challenged. It should always, the mind is kept youthful by inquiring, by curiosity, by exploring, by expanding, by opening, not by the opposite qualities, right?
Hmm.
Because that's the thing that's going to cause health to degenerate, right? It's like the confusion you're making. How can you make a proper choice from a confused place? It's better not to make a choice.
I think that very much resonates with my experience of decision fatigue. And I think that what you are saying about um, the heart being the center, right? Being the place, the seat of consciousness. It challenges a Western patriarchal man made idea system. It challenges, right, the fragmentation of the body mind. It challenges that narrative that I think, therefore I am. It challenges, right, all of the ideologies of toxic masculinity. So I'm gonna bring Mars back again. This is one element of Mars. Um, and I'm going to um I'm going to leave it here with this invitation for a connection with the heart as the seat of consciousness. And for me, also the heart representing the place of courage, which Mars is also. Mars is the planet that allows us to act from the courage that comes in Western astrology, again, from the sign Leo representing the heart, but the ability to act from that place, to take action
Mhm.
from our conscious heart, from our inner knowing. Um, Seems like it's providing me with a lot of incentive for appropriate wisdom practices. And I will be working on my crimes against wisdom this season. Um, I also want to ask you, I'll do it after we finish, because I would love for you to be able to share the actual Sanskrit language for the crimes against wisdom and the misuse of the senses and the concept of time, so we can actually spell it out. We are always in a practice of honoring and studying these ancient wisdom traditions. And I so appreciate you always teaching us the shlokas with the Sanskrit.
Mhm.
And we are in a practice of study and a practice of curiosity and humility and growth. And so we try. And I really deeply appreciate you always being a teacher there. And so it is important for us to decenter English as the way to know information. And I thank you for bringing this month's wisdom to trust your gut. Antonio Aragona, Dr. A, Ayurvedic doctor. Um, we can find you at stillpointayurveda.com. Dr. A does see folks via telemedicine. So you don't have to be here in Philly with us. But if you are, he is here, and grateful for you. Is there anything you would like to say as we close out?
No, I'm always grateful for the opportunity of being of service to the community, and I always love each new person that comes in because it's an adventure for me and it's a learning experience for me. It's a humbling experience for me. And then, doing all this forces me to continue with my studies and to dive in and question and connect with my colleagues and question and you know, so that it's a pay it forward and indefinitely, which is what the rishis wanted, which was like to help humanity to find itself again and to come back to the heart, you know. And it comes back to the heart. I mean, the heart of the matter. We use that saying often, right? It's like, what's the heart of the matter? And
Mhm.
so I'm grateful for all of this. And yeah, I'm always open to new people and even people that I haven't seen in a while. It's just the door is always open.
Come back.
Come back.
Yes.
Be willing.
Yes, be willing. That's right. That's right. I want you to have the last word. Um, and I look forward to seeing you for my appointment for the greatest heart-centered care I have ever received. I don't get paid, y'all. I pay, and I need you to know it's worth every penny and more. This is the kind of care we all deserve. Thank you, Dr. A, for your service. Um, and with that, we invite you to trust your gut, and we'll see you next month.
See you next month. Thank you all.
Ta-da.